In this video, we're going to learn about a Black Hawk military helicopter, but not just any Black Hawk. This is a specialized version called the Pave Hawk. We'll walk through the different features of the helicopter, the engines on top, the rotors, and the flight controls and how they're used to maneuver the helicopter. This video is sponsored by Ground News. This is a specialized version of the Black Hawk helicopter. It's called a Sikorsky HH-60G Pave Hawk. It's owned and operated by the United States Air Force. It's been in use since the early 1980s. The Pave Hawk helicopter is meant for combat, search, and rescue. So anyone on the ground that needs to be picked up in a combat zone or in another dangerous area, the Pave Hawk helicopter can go pick them up and bring them back to safety. The Pave Hawk usually has a crew of 4, a pilot, a co-pilot, and 2 special missions aviators, otherwise known as flight engineers. Then, depending on the mission, they'll have several more para-rescue men, also known as PJs. It's very common to fly in a formation of 2 Pave Hawk helicopters. These helicopters have a connection with NASA at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. For many space launches, Pave Hawk helicopters have been ready, just in case something goes wrong and they need to rescue the astronauts. But besides that, missions have been flown all over the world, including the United States, Central America, Africa, Europe and the Middle East, and Asia. Each helicopter costs around $40 million US. The Pave Hawk is just under 20 meters long and about 5 meters high. Some of the major parts of the helicopter are the main rotors on top, the fuselage, which is the body of the helicopter, the cockpit in the front, the cabin right behind, and then in the back we have the tail, the stabilator, and the tail rotors at the very end. The first thing let's dive deep into is the fueling of the helicopter. It runs off of jet fuel. Right here is the main fuel tank, and then the auxiliary fuel tank right in front of it. You can see this one from the back of the main cabin. The regular Black Hawk helicopter does not have this extra auxiliary fuel tank. That means that the Pave Hawk can fly a lot further. There are 2 ways to refuel the helicopter. When it's on the ground, they'll use the fueling connections on the left side. But the Pave Hawk can also refuel while in flight. There's times when they can't land or they're in a hurry to finish their mission. In this case, they'll use the air refueling probe. They fly behind another aircraft. This one is called an HC-130J, and it carries extra fuel for the Pave Hawk. At the end of the wing is the refueling pod. The fueling connections come out of the back of this pod. Then the Pave Hawk flies up behind, extends the fuel probe, and carefully connects it up to the fuel drogue. Fuel can then transfer into the Pave Hawk. They can even get 2 helicopters refueling at the same time. Once hooked up, it usually doesn't take more than 10 or 20 minutes to fill their fuel tanks. This whole process is called aerial refueling, or AR. On rare occasions, the Pave Hawk needs to get rid of some extra weight by using the fuel dumping tube. This doesn't happen too often, but it's there if they need it. Let's look at some more details up front here. These are the missile warning sensors, so that you know right away if missiles are being launched at your helicopter. It's probably a good thing to know. Then there's the radar warning receiver, so you know if you're being picked up by the enemy's radar. Inside the nose of the helicopter, you'll find the radio compartment with communications gear inside of it. This is the color weather radar, used to detect storms so that you can hopefully avoid flying into any bad weather. Down towards the bottom is the forward-looking infrared camera, which is another way to help them see at night. On the bottom is the LARS antenna, which stands for Lightweight Airborne Recovery System. This is used to help locate survivors down below. The cockpit is inside of here. The pilot is on the right, and the co-pilot is on the left. There's windows directly above, but also below as well. This allows for increased visibility while they are in flight. There are plenty of knobs, switches, and gauges for the pilot and co-pilot to monitor. What we're going to look at are the 3 flight controls: the collective, the cyclic, and the tail rotor pedals. Later in the video, we'll see how these controls can help maneuver the helicopter. The cool thing about these seats is that they can compress down in the event of a crash. This will help cushion the landing and hopefully prevent any injuries. On each side of the Pavehawk, there's usually mounted guns. In most cases, the guns will be the same. On this Pavehawk, we have the GAU-2 minigun. These are operated by the 2 Special Missions aviators in the back. Let's take a closer look at the gun. It has a rotating barrel assembly on the front. The ammo is stored in the ammunitions box right here, and then moves up through the ammo belt, up then to the main gun. The ammo loops around several times while it's on its way to being fired. This gun can fire up to 4,000 rounds per minute. The cabin can be accessed by opening up the sliding doors on the side. Inside the cabin on the ceiling is the FRIES bar, and that stands for Fast Rope Insertion Extraction System. The bars can extend out to either side of the helicopter, and then a thick rope called the fast rope is tied at the very end. The PJs can then quickly slide down to the ground. This is ideal for situations when the Pavehawk can't land on the ground. Sometimes we need to bring up survivors back up to the helicopter. In that case, they used the hoist. This is a hydraulically powered cable system to bring up survivors from the ground. It has a cable length of 61 meters and a weight limit of 272 kilograms. These are chaff and flare buckets, and these are on both sides of the helicopter. The flare buckets are the ones facing forward, and there's 2 more of them up front as well. When these fire off, it looks like fireworks, but the real purpose is to confuse any heat-seeking missiles and hopefully save the helicopter. The chaff buckets are pointed up and towards the back. It shoots off tiny bits of metal into the tail rotor to create a chaff cloud. It looks like faint smoke. The intent here is to confuse enemy radar. This area here is called the aft transition bay, which is basically a place to store more electronic equipment. On the side of the Pavehawk, there are a few steps. These are good footholds to make it a lot easier to climb up on top to perform maintenance and pre-flight checks on the helicopter. The Pavehawk has 2 engines. These are General Electric T701C engines. They are referred to as turboshaft engines. It brings in air through the front, heats it up, and then compresses it, which then turns the shaft down the middle. That's why it's called a turboshaft engine. Now compare that to a turbojet engine on an airplane. It brings in air through the front, compresses it, heats it, and then instead of turning a shaft down the middle, it takes that hot air and shoots it out the back. This provides the thrust which pushes the airplane forward. Now that's the turbojet engine, but on a helicopter it doesn't need that thrust to push it forward. That's why it uses 2 turboshaft engines to spin the shafts, which then work together to spin the main rotor blades. Now don't forget about the tail rotors on the very back. They're powered by the same engines. The 2 engines also turn a shaft that goes all the way back through the tail and up to the tail rotors. In the middle is the Auxiliary Power Unit, or APU for short. This is the small engine that provides electrical power for the helicopter. The APU is also responsible for starting up the main turboshaft engines. In the center, we have our 4 main rotors. These are like the wings for a helicopter. When the air is flowing fast enough, they will generate lift. Now you could generate more lift by spinning the blades faster, Some toy helicopters or drones work this way. However, this is not how full-size helicopters work. The rotors on the top spin at a constant speed. It doesn't change very much once the engines are running at full speed. For the Pavehawk, they spin at 258 RPM, or rotations per minute. The way we generate lift is by changing the pitch of these blades. This affects the angle of attack. When you increase it, it generates more lift. Do it on all 4 of the rotor blades, and this will cause the helicopter to go up. Decrease the pitch to generate less lift, which will cause the helicopter to descend or accelerate downwards. The turboshaft engines are spinning these 4 massive pieces of metal one way. This causes the main body of the helicopter to want to spin the other way. If we did nothing to stop this, the helicopter would spin out of control. This is the reason we have the tail rotors in the back. It provides a counter torque, or in other words, a spinning force in the other direction. This stabilizes the helicopter so it's not spinning uncontrollably. If you come back here and look at these tail rotors, they are not perfectly aligned. They are tilted by 20 degrees. This makes it so that it also provides a small amount of lift in the very back of the helicopter. This helps counteract the extra weight of the tail. Another thing about the tail rotors is that each of the 4 blades can also change their pitch. This changes how much airflow there is. Increase the pitch if you want to turn to the left, and then decrease the pitch if you want to turn to the right. How about moving the helicopter? So if we want to go forward or backward or left or right, how does that work? First, let me show you the mechanism in the center here. This is called the swash plate assembly. Here's the main swash plate, the rotor mast, and the 4 pitch control rods, which are then connected to each of the 4 rotor blades. The swash plate can move up or down. This directly affects the pitch on each of the 4 blades. But the swash plate can also tilt from side to side. This means it will change the pitch more on some blades than on others. And if you watch it spinning around, each blade is always changing. Let's focus in on just this blade. When it's on the right side, it's relatively flat. But when it's on the left side, it's more angled. It's flat, now it's angled. It's flat, now it's angled. This means unequal lift on different sides of the helicopter. This is used to maneuver the helicopter in different directions. So in short, the swash plate mechanism is one of the main ways that you can control a helicopter. One of the hardest things to understand here is something called gyroscopic precession. And this happens to anything that spins, but it's especially important to helicopters. So if you want to pitch the helicopter forward, you might think we need to apply more lift in the back of the rotor blades. But if we did this, it would actually roll the helicopter to the left. We apply a force, and it doesn't take effect until 90 degrees later. To actually pitch the helicopter forward, more lift needs to happen on the left side. And again, if you've never heard of gyroscopic precession before, this probably seems a little strange. The good news is that helicopter pilots don't have to be actively thinking about it, but it's definitely good to understand. Now that we know how the rotors work, let's take a look at the flight controls that you'll find in the cockpit. There are 3 main ones, and we saw these earlier in the video: the collective, the cyclic, and the tail rotor pedals. Let's go through what each one of them does. First, the collective. This moves the helicopter up or down. Pull on the collective, and this will raise the swash plate. This increases the lift on the helicopter, causing it to rise into the air. Push down on the collective, the swash plate goes down, and the helicopter generates less lift to move the helicopter down. The center control is called the cyclic. This is used to move the helicopter forward, backward, or left or right. Move the control, this will tilt the swash plate, causing an uneven amount of lift on one side, which then moves the helicopter. This automatically adjusts for gyroscopic precession. All the pilot has to do is move the cyclic in the direction that the helicopter should go. Down here are the tail rotor pedals, which of course uses the tail rotors to turn the helicopter to the left or to the right. This is also known as controlling the yaw, or vertical axis of rotation. If we push the left pedal, the tail rotor blade's pitch increases, which then rotates the helicopter to the left. Push on the right pedal decreases the pitch, which rotates the helicopter to the right. So in summary, you have the collective, which moves the helicopter up or down, the cyclic, which moves the helicopter forward, backward, or side to side, and then the tail rotor pedals, which rotates the helicopter left or right. At this point, I just want to mention that these three controls, the swash plate assembly, and of course gyroscopic precession, this is all not unique to just the Pavehawk. This is how most helicopters work in general. The Pavehawk helicopter sometimes needs to be transported to another destination. Before this happens, there's some preparations that need to take place. The four main rotor blades can actually fold back towards the tail, and then secured in place. The tail rotors are folded and also the stabilator. Now the Pavehawk takes up much less space and can be put inside of another aircraft. This is a C-17. And it can fit 2 Pavehawk helicopters inside of it. Now it's not used as much, but the Pavehawk also has the ability to fold back the tail as well, which would reduce the size even more for some extreme cases. The HH-60G Pavehawk has been flying for almost 40 years now. At some point in the near future, it will be replaced by the HH-60W Jolly Green II. This will provide many improvements to the electronics, fuel system, engines, the armor plating, and of course the weapons systems. There is so much to learn in the world today. When you read the news from only one source, you may be getting just one part of the story. Ground News has an answer to this problem. This is an informative website and app that lets you compare current events and how they're being covered. Pick a story and then take a look at the bias distribution chart, which shows you the news outlets that are covering it and where they fall on the political spectrum. Then you can click on the different sources and see for yourself. With Ground News, you can ensure that you are getting the bigger picture and not just one piece of it. This will allow you to cut through the noise and understand the world much better. Another helpful feature they have is called Blind Spot, which lets you see stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. You can personalize Ground News to show you the topics that interest you the most, like finance, science, or sports. Try it for free by going to ground.news/JaredOwen or download the free app by clicking the link in the description below. My name's Jared. I make 3D animations on how things work. To be notified about future videos, you can click the subscribe button here, or click on these cards to see more videos just like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.